Hey everyone, this is Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today's review is of a film from the mid-90s that I had heard of many years ago when I was a kid via trailers and stuff, and never got a chance to watch it, never saw it on TV and stuff, until once a couple years ago I happened to be flipping through channels, movie channels, checking to see what's going to be on that day, and I noticed it was going to be on. And this was the time I was starting to get more into action movies. You know, you guys already know that. So, I'm like, I might as well give it a watch, and I did not know how I was going to feel about the movie, and I enjoyed it, and even now I still enjoy it. I'm talking, of course, about the sci-fi action movie based on the comic of the same name, starring Sylvester Stallone, Judge Dredd. Now, one thing I will say right off the bat is I know that this film is only loosely based on the comic source. I know, because I've done research, I noticed all the differences and stuff, which I will note some of them in this video. But I will say, I do enjoy this movie. Because for me, it is an entertaining movie. Granted, for fans of the comics, it might not have been what you would expect. So if you're a fan of the comic and you're like, well, how can you like this movie? You might want to turn, if you are going to be like an a-hole about it, turn off the video. If you're going to be respectful of my opinion that I like the movie, then keep watching. Now, the reason I say this is because I know how certain comic fans can get all passionate and stuff. I mean, movie fans can get that. Everyone knows about the Nolan fanboys and the critics that gave the movie negative reviews. You guys don't remember that? Go ahead and die! You guys don't know that. But, so, as I was saying. Now, the movie was directed by Danny Cannon. Yeah, that's right, his name is Cannon. Now that I've said it, anyway, he's only directed 4 of the movies beside this. Before this, he directed a movie called The Young Americans, which I'm about to check to see why that movie sounds familiar. Well, it doesn't. Oh, Viggo Mortensen was in it. Huh. That's interesting. And after this, he directed a movie called Phoenix, which I'm checking to see what that's about, too. That's a crime movie that had Ray Liotta and Anthony LaPaglia. Huh. Looks like that might be interesting. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and then of course a movie called Goal, which is the last movie he directed. I'm about to take a look, see what... Oh, it's a soccer movie. But I wonder why I wonder why he had a hiatus in between 98 and 2005, probably doing other stuff, but... Anyway, for what I have to say, you can tell there's slightly inexperience in this movie. That's one of the things that does kind of show in. But still, despite that, I felt he managed to do well. It's just the script he was given, I guess. Because from what I understand, the comics kind of have a maybe dark humorous to it. Which this movie does have humor, but it's not dark humor. It's kind of like what you would expect from a comic movie, which I guess that's a problem with a lot of the comic movies that were released in the 90s, that they were trying to get a mixed audience instead of the type of audience they should have gone for. I mean, nowadays you can release a dark comic movie, no one gives a crap. Which, of course, if they do that with TMNT, I think the problem is going to be. But as you guys know, a lot of my favorite comic book movies are dark, and they were from around this time period. The 90s TMNT movie, Batman Return. Even The Shadow has a little bit of darkness to it, but not as much as those other films. But even a couple years after this, Blade. Even Spawn has a little bit more of a darker tone than this movie, but it's another day, another video. But despite that, I do like the comic book feel to it. And I have to say, if you're going to do that, Stallone is a perfect choice. And I know that with the new movie, people are saying that they like Urban better, but I've actually heard mixed results about that. Some people like Stallone better, some like Urban better. When I see the movie, I'll let you guys know in that review. But I have to say, I like Sylvester Stallone's casting as Judge Dredd, and for what it is, he does a pretty good job. And while I'm on the subject, I know he takes his freaking helmet off, but here's the thing I'm going to say. In the comics, Dredd not taking off his helmet when he does, not seeing his face, that can work. But in a live-action movie, granted I don't know how they're doing it in the new movie, so I can't comment on how that works, but I think it's not really something that you can get away with unless you cast an unknown actor as Dredd. And if you do, you have to be very creative, so I don't mind it. And for the opening scenes, I think it was good probably keeping the helmet on, but then once at a point you're going to have to take it off. I mean, once one of the plot points happens, you'd have to take the helmet off anyway, so I know someone's going to change the story, but I don't mind the story. Now, the plot of the movie is that it's the 3rd millennium, and of course the movie is narrated by James Earl Jones, which The Nostalgia Critic, when he reviewed this movie, did the most obvious joke he can do because he calls them an elite special force. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force, or in this case, the judges. Ah, Judge Vader! Anyway, back to the thing. Much of Earth has become an uninhabitable wasteland. They don't really go into much specifics, but I'm gonna guess it probably has to do with nuclear war because there's mutants. Now, the majority of humanity resides in megacities, which they don't really list in the dialogue how many there are, but you can tell there's a bunch of them, and they're overcrowded. And because of all the overcrowdedness and, of course, all the chaos that has happened since the Earth has become like this, the traditional justice system that we know, has been replaced by a corps of judges, which combines the role of police officer, judge, jury, and executioner. And they're called street judges. And the movie mostly takes place in Mega City 1, which is on the East Coast, if I remember correctly. And we're introduced, first, of course, we see Rob Schneider's character, which I will say, Rob Schneider, I don't really hate him, but I could see why some people don't like him. This movie, I don't really mind him, but I will say I can see why if you watch this movie and you don't like Rob Schneider, he can get annoying. I do get a joke out of some of the stuff he says, like, I'm alive! I'm alive! Oh, you are too. Stuff like that, and then of course, come on, what are you doing? Come on, we don't have time for this. Stuff like that, but like I said, I can see why some people might find him annoying. His character is named Herman Ferguson. He's a hacker who's recently been released from prison, and when he is released, he's caught in a firefight, and he ends up basically hijacked into this one room that is starting the firefight. Now, of course, judges show up, one of them, of course, being Judge Hershey, played by Diane Lane, and, of course, the legendary Judge Joseph Dredd, played by Sly. Now, of course, in all this, after a brilliant firefight, which even a few people I know that don't like the movie, I think might give this film credit, like I know my friend Gabo gives the film credit, at least for the opening firefight scene, rapid fire, double whammy. I have to say, the Judge Dredd gun is super awesome. Now, if the Terminator had that gun, we'd be screwed. It's basically, the Judge gun is basically the equivalent of the Batman utility belt. It basically has so many functions. It has a function for everything. Oh, yeah. Back massage. I know I just stole a joke from the critic, but you get the point. Now, at the same time, we're introduced to Rico, played by Armand Assante, who I don't really know him from any other movies. I know, if I remember correctly, I think he was in Murder at 1600, but I could be wrong. But he is a classically trained actor, I believe, but I could be wrong on that too, because I noticed he did do some, I think, a stage thing. I know he did some TV work, and I know he got nominated, I think, for an award for something called Jack the Ripper. But I don't mind him as Rico. Granted, he's a little over the top, but I think he feels like feeling, I'm doing a comic book movie, I might as well go a little over the top. Because remember, it's the time when they were doing a lot of that in comics, so you can't really blame him, especially with the director. Anyway, Rico is a former judge turned psychopathic murderer, as we find out later. He has a connection to Dredd, and Dredd's the one to put him in jail. He escaped from prison and goes on basically to frame Dredd. Dredd's arrested, and of course, he is convicted based on evidence that is very hard to tamper with, but I'm not going to spoil how it was tampered, because it goes into an important plot point that relates to the relationship between Dredd and Rico. Those of you who've read the comics and seen the movie, you already know what it is, but for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil it. Especially if in the new series they're going to dredge up this plot line again, which they probably will in the sequel. Anyway, Dredd normally would have been executed in the movie, at least, but in the comic it's a different thing. He would have just been sent to the moon of Titan. But anyway, the Chief Justice Fargo, played by Max von Sydow, which I will say he's probably one of the best acting performances in the movie when doesn't go over the top. And I've never actually heard anybody complain about his role in the movie. So if you actually have read the comics, I want to hear what you guys have to say about him as Fargo, other than the fact he shows his face. Okay. Anyway, he steps down. Judge Griffin takes control, and Dredd is basically ostracized to prison. And of course, around this, we find out that Griffin and Rico are working together, and they have a plan that involves clones. I'm not going to spoil how it involves clones. And of course, Dredd basically is freed somehow. I'm not going to spoil it. He has a couple adventures in the wasteland, and then he has to make his way back to the city to stop both Rico and Griffin before their plan comes to fruition. And of course, it's basically not like it doesn't have a lot of bloodshed. If I remember correctly, it's PG-13. But it does have the right amount of action, at least for me, that I would expect from a movie with this type of plot. And like I said, I enjoy Stallone, and he's a guy who's believable in action. Granted, he does go slightly over the top at times, but I think it's just like him and Armand figured they're in a comic movie, they might as well do it. And I think I don't know if this is one of the movies people cite when they say that Stallone can't act, but he's acting in the movie. He's just overacting. The thing is, if you're overacting, that usually means you either can't act or you can't act, but you're just overdoing it. In this case, he's overdoing it. Now, a thing of overacting where you can't act would be Hayden Christensen, but that's for an entirely different reason. And when I re-review Star Wars, I'll explain it more with my new thing on acting. But with Stallone, he just went a little bit more because of the comic movie. Like I said, they did that a lot in the 90s, so I don't fault it for that. And also, I find it enjoyable. And of course, I know some people are annoyed by the fact that he says, "I knew you'd say that" a lot, but it doesn't really bother me. Granted, I know that's not from the comics, and I know they're trying to do it, but it doesn't annoy me. And of course, like you would expect, Stallone does do one-liners like "happy motoring," stuff like that. That doesn't bother me either. I do enjoy the practical effects and the I think the green screen would be the right one. I know that there was some matte paintings used in the movie from those things. I enjoyed it. The costume design, a little bit slightly over the top, comic bookish, especially when you compare. But I don't mind it. I know with the new movie they're going a little bit more subtle. They're being faithful to the original design while being more subtle, but I don't mind it. But it's like I said, 90s, so it don't bother me. I know some people's going to say, "Hey, you can't use that as excuse," but it's just my opinion. It was from the 90s. They were doing a lot of this in comic movies. Granted, some people may not like it, but I don't really have a problem with it. And I like the design of the costumes in this movie. It really just showed at the money. Like, I know this movie cost $90 million and only made $113, which I could see probably why with the fan base why it would. But I can honestly say I see at least a good percentage of that money up on the screen. Granted, this is a time where Sly could demand a big chunk of change, so probably $20 million of that went to him at least. But a good portion of the rest of it, other than what was sent to the cast and crew, I could see actually up on the screen. So I could see where this money was well spent. Probably could have been spent to make the movie slightly darker, but for what it is, I don't mind it. Let's see, I've already mentioned the acting performances. I don't really mind them because they do kind of fit the tone of the movie. Because what an actor has to do is when you read the script, you gotta decide how you're going to approach the role, and it has to match the tone of the movie. And the movie's going to be kind of cheesy. You're going to go with the cheesy interpretation of the character, especially if that's the type of direction that the director's giving you, or if that's what you think the super objective is. Like with Rico, he's slightly insane, so him being over the top kind of fits. You guys know I don't mind over the topness and insane characters, but anyway, like I said, if there's only one thing that they probably should have had is to make this movie better, they could have had a more experienced director on hand. Probably rewritten the script one more time to make it slightly darker. Because I don't mind the approach, how it's being serious, because I've never read the comics, so I don't know how serious the comics are. I remember going into it blind. I know more about the Green Lantern stuff than I know about this. But let's director, make it slightly darker. Maybe with Stallone a little bit, tone him back just a little bit, because even though I don't mind him being slightly over the top at times, he probably should have been at least a little bit more serious. Because Rico being over the top, he's insane. Like I said, doesn't bother him. The rest of the actors, I don't really have a problem with the performances, except, like I said, I like Schneider, but at times there could be a little times he could have been toned back a little bit. And at times his character does kind of seem a little unnecessary too. I mean, the only reason he's kind of in the movie is to hack stuff. That's basically his whole real purpose in the movie, and to be the comic relief character. Like I said, it's funny, but that's but like I said, beside my criticisms, it's a movie I can watch, and you guys can expect a tribute to this movie because I do have the perfect song already picked out. And I know in retrospect Stallone doesn't like this movie, but each their own, and I know that the creator of the comic character doesn't really like the movie. But that's their prerogatives. For me, I enjoy the movie. If you don't like the movie, that's cool, but don't, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, don't be all disrespectful about it. My rating for Judge Dredd... sorry about my voice. My rating for Judge Dredd is... An honesty 3.5 out of 5 stars. Not a perfect movie, but for me it's an enjoyable movie, and if a movie is enjoyable, to me at least, if the movie's at least enjoyable to watch, then to me it at least is a minorly good movie.